everybody, let's continue on with our discussion about persuasive speaking. So today we're going to talk about constructing the persuasive speech. So let's first talk about the components of an argument. An argument is your stated position and it's supported with evidence and reasoning. And the elements of your argument are claims, evidence, and warrant. A claim is your proposition, it's your conclusion. What are you trying to prove? The evidence is the supporting material, which would be your proof. And the warrant is the reasoning process. So why does the evidence prove the claim? For example, here's a claim. This car needs to go to the shop. What would be some evidence to support that? Well, we would each have our own different examples maybe of the evidence that support it. It could be because the muffler sounds bad. The check engine light is on. The something on it is out of date. And then the warrant, going back, is so why does your evidence prove the claim? And that can be different reasons. It could be historical. The last time the muffler made this noise, it needed to go to the shop. It could be out of the manual. The manual says when this light comes on, it needs to go out of the shop. So there are many different evidences and warrants, but you need to make sure that they back up your claim. Another one is it going to rain today? The evidence for that, again, that could be varied. It could be that the weatherman said it's going to rain today. It could be the feeling in the air. You could have one of those gauges that lets you know if it's going to rain. And then your warrant would be, again, going back to what would prove your evidence and that it's going to rain today. Okay, we're going to skip that one. Your types of claims are the next thing we're going to talk about. So there's fact, value, and policy, and you have an assignment this week that's related to that to give you more practice with these different types of claims because you're going to be making these claims in your persuasive speech. So claims of fact is forensics. So it's something is or will be true. So that's all going to be your research. So your research needs to be factual, not something that you just pulled together. Claims of fact always need to be something that is proven. Value is going to be good or bad, right or wrong. So that's more making judgment calls, something that you think is good or bad or right or wrong and you're trying to convince us of. That's a value claim. Then a policy claim is going to be deliberative. So it's going to be recommending an action. You're trying to convince us to take an action or convince the county to take an action, etc. So let's look at that. So why I'm talking about smoking in my persuasive speech. This first claim, it is rude to smoke in public places. What do you think that would be, looking at our list of fact, value, and policy? So, it's rude to smoke in public places would be a claim of value because you're judging what's good or bad or right or wrong, and that can be determined by society. In our society, it's rude to smoke in public. Smoking should be banned in public places. Let's look back at our list. So that would be a policy claim because you're trying to enact a policy or recommend an action. Smoking causes cancer. That would be, of course, a fact claim because that's something that's been proven in the medical community. And it doesn't always lead to cancer, but it's widely known that smoking does increase your risk of cancer. And then this last one, you should stop smoking. What do you think that one is? It's a little bit more difficult, but anytime you're saying what somebody should or shouldn't do, you're making a claim of good or bad or right or wrong. So that's also value. And again, you have a worksheet on that, so it'll give you a little bit more practice, but you need to be thinking about these types of claims that you're going to make when you do your persuasive speeches and what it's good to combine them, but you need to at least include, one or two of these. So let's talk about evidence and warrants a little bit further. So the evidence examines your sources and it offers relevant evidence. Warrants is your lines of reasoning. It's causal reasoning, it's reasoning from analogy, and then it's deductive versus inductive reasoning. And you spent a lot of time last week on inductive versus deductive reasoning, and I led you to outside sources, the YouTube video, and the chart to kind of explain those. So we're not going to spend a lot of time on that now because there's a lot to get through, but you did work on that last week. So let's just talk about the other ones. So lines of reasoning and causal reasoning, and then reasoning from analogy, and then there's the deductive versus inductive. But remember, deductive is your general idea that leads to a specific conclusion, and inductive is your specific example that leads to a general conclusion. But again, you talked about that last week, so I'm going to skip through a lot of these so that we can move forward. So remember, your major premise is your warrant, your minor premise is your evidence, and your conclusion is your claim for deductive. And then for inductive, for inductive, you're going to be doing specific examples and general conclusions. Moving forward, all right, fallacies. So the fallacies of an argument, you have a logical fallacy quiz this week, and you do have 3 chances on it. But let's go ahead and talk through some fallacies, because this is a mistake a lot of students make and people make in general. And sometimes it's not mistaking. Sometimes people like to make an argument that's not valid, and they use fallacies to kind of make it look valid. But that's why it's important for you to be able to spot fallacies in an argument, especially like from the news media and Facebook and places like that. So let's talk through them, because there are quite a few of them. So, begging the question, the first fallacies. That really is circular reasoning. It's the premise and conclusion are the same. You're really not putting any facts or statistics. You're just restating what you already said. So, example, poor people are lazy. If they weren't so lazy, they would not be poor. All you've done there is just circular reasoning, because you've said that poor people are lazy, and you've said they weren't so lazy, they would not be poor. So, it's just the same thing restated, which does not make a good argument. Then there's the bandwagon. You see this a lot. This is very much commercials trying to sell you something. It's also called ad populum, which is most popular, and it's majority rules. So this is the largest hospital in the region, therefore it's the best. All the cool people drink this beer, therefore it's the best. Camel cigarettes are the most popular, therefore it's the best. So that's an easy one to recognize. Then you have the either or fallacy. This is also called false dichotomy or false dilemma, and it's where you present only 2 extreme positions without acknowledging the middle ground. So you're trying to force people into a position by just doing 2 extremes. So either you support this policy or you don't want to work here anymore. So that's calling into loyalty. So if your company gave a policy and you had some questions about it, instead of acknowledging that there is a middle ground where, maybe you support this part of the policy and not that, it's just saying straight up like, oh, you don't support it, you don't want to work here. And the news media, going back to either or, the news media will do that a lot. So look out for that. And then there's the ad hominem, and that's to the person. So those are going to be fallacies where you're directly attacking who the person is instead of the argument. So you don't feel like you can make a good argument against their actual policy or what they've said, so you just attack them. So she can't keep her personal life together, so we should not accept her idea on how to improve the policies at work. And it's also anything in the comments section on social media. Rarely ever is anybody on social media actually attacking a policy with logic and reasoning and warrants and claims. They're usually just attacking the person, which is really, that comes from just weakness. You really should try to avoid doing this too, because it just makes you seem weak. It's like you can't come up with anything better than just to attack the other person. Then there's also a red herring, which is a redirection. So how can we talk about education funding when our streets are in disrepair? So those two don't have anything to do with each other than just maybe tax dollars go into it. But it's like you're completely taking the focus off of this topic and introducing a completely different topic to try to distract people. Parents do this with children a lot, which is, okay in that context. But if they're crying about something, they'll say, oh, but look over here at this. So it's that whole redirection. And unfortunately, it still works even though we're not children anymore. But red herring and redirection definitely is something that people try to use. Then there's hasty generalization, which is an error in inductive reasoning, using 1 or 2 few examples. So 2 of my grandparents smoked and lived to be 80, so I don't think smoking causes health problems. We hear that a lot, hasty generalization. I think we do this in the South a lot too, because we seem to reference our families a lot for everything, and you'll always hear that person that says, oh, my cousin ate 3-pound cakes a day and never got diabetes, that kind of thing. So just don't use hasty generalization. You have to have enough people. And this is where, we talked about in the informative speeches of having a good, a sample audience. And part of the reason that we do the audience's analysis, so you have the opinion of more than one people. And when you cite statistics, you're going to want to make sure that a study has had the correct amount of people for it to be a valid study and not just looked at 3 people's opinions. Okay, then there's non sequitur, which does not follow. That's making a leap in logic. So Hitler was a vegetarian, therefore vegetarianism is wrong. So huge leap from Hitler's personal eating preferences to make a claim overall of vegetarianism. And you see this a lot with, especially, and sometimes it doesn't come from a bad place. Sometimes it comes from a place where people have been wounded by a group before, so they go ahead and make the assumption that their group is wrong. For instance, sometimes you hear this with Christianity, like, well, Bob Baker was a Christian and he was skimming money off a church, so all Christian leaders are a bunch of con men. So you'll hear that a lot, and that's non sequitur. So don't use that in your speeches, and try to look for that and rebut that if you hear it. And then there's the slippery slope, pretty common one. It's a chain of events that just trigger, one action will trigger a chain of events that will escalate and end tragically. It's to scare you. The news does this a lot too, because this is a real scare tactic. So if we don't elect Joe Bob Smith, the country will descend into chaos and everyone will starve to death. And those are real trying to get a fear response out of you. Okay, and here's just 3 others that you will hear, and that they talk about when talk about fallacies. There's the straw man, which is misrepresenting the opposition, then attacking that argument. It's where you invent the argument that they said instead of what they really said. So a straw man is easier to knock down than a real person. So it's like saying you want to legalize marijuana, it must be okay to you for everyone to walk around high all the time. Work, school, just everywhere. So it's taking something somebody said, like maybe the person said you should legalize medical marijuana, and you're rephrasing what that person has said so that you can attack it more effectively, but you're misrepresenting what they meant by what they said. Then there's unproven assumption, which is basing your argument on an unproven premise. So everyone knows that students would like more evening classes. We will schedule more classes in the evening with no research being conducted. That's just your own personal opinion. And then there's false cause, which is also post hoc ergo propter hoc. And that's assuming that because A occurred first, it was a direct cause of B. So Hoover was elected president, and a few months later the stock market crashed. Hoover caused the Great Depression. You see this a lot with, what's the right word? When people have, like voodoo and people believing kind of strange things. So because I saw a red clover and then it was a blood moon that night, it means that the red clover caused the blood moon. Stuff like that. They kind of, like I said, just kind of the out there assumptions come from post hoc ergo propter hoc a lot. All right, so that's all we're going to talk about for today. I know it's a lot of information. It's a little bit of a longer slide, and that's even with cutting out the inductive and deductive reasoning part. And that's why I moved that to last week, so we'd have a little bit more time to talk through these claims. Please make sure that you're checking in, that you're reviewing my feedback on your work, and that you're doing the activities that go along with these PowerPoints, because they really will help solidify your understanding, especially the logical fallacy quiz, because like I said, you'll get 3 attempts on that one, so you can keep doing it until you get it right and understand it, and then you'll have a fact, value, or policy proposition assignment, and then writing persuasive propositions. And this is important because you're going to need to write them and speak them in your persuasive speech. As always, contact me if you have any questions, and I will talk to you later.